Hello, this is the first in a series of 3 parts reviewing Ocarina of Time, with this section primarily focusing on the Child Link portion of the game and all the mechanics and themes introduced during that time frame. It's recommended that this one is watched before the later parts that'll be released on dates unknown at the time of this recording. I hope you enjoy how Ocarina of Time won me over. What makes a game a masterpiece? Is it based on its impact upon release or its lasting age decades later? Does it have to be completely flawless, or can it be greater than the sum of its parts? These were the questions I asked myself during my very first playthrough of Ocarina of Time. I never played this game growing up, or any Zelda games really, with very few exceptions, so I went into Ocarina of Time understanding it was the most critically acclaimed game ever. So, was it one of the best games ever made?
The answer is yes and no.
While I loved the N64 charm, it could be clunky and slow at times. I enjoyed the adventurous story, but thought it was a bit too simplistic. And I especially loved the dungeons, but the water temple... Need I say more? Even then, I looked back on the experience fondly, but the almost impossibly high standards I went in with weighed on me so much during my playthrough that I felt as if I had to constantly challenge the game's status as a masterpiece with every single problem I could think of, big or small. After beating the game, I felt like my work still wasn't done. I felt as if I didn't go in with the right intentions and I was beckoned to return. I wondered if the game would change if I dropped the standards I had, going back without any sort of confirmation bias and engaging with the game fully, doing all of the side content finally. And after that, everything clicked even more, and Ocarina of Time finally won me over. Ocarina of Time's opening act in Kokiri Forest is perfect for what it is. It foreshadows the upcoming story, then immediately gets the young destined hero going with a simple objective that subconsciously tutorializes all of the basic movement mechanics of the player. Experimenting with the unconventional automatic jumping, testing Link's mobility, using the context-sensitive A button, exploring to seek rewards, and learning how you can bulgarize NPCs when exploring their homes will all give the player rupees. Once a player has enough rupees to purchase a sword and shield, they can set off to their destination. Many of these conventions are elementary nowadays, but it's noticeable how seamless it feels even from the lens of a player in 1998 who was just learning how to play 3D games. While it's commendable they are already playing the game in about 5 minutes or less, the one thing that frankly dampens any repeat playthroughs is the agonizingly slow text speed, even for a game of this time. An option to fast forward text during story cutscenes, and especially when being interrupted by Kaepora Gaebora checking in to make sure you know how to use all the various menu subscreens, would have been a more than welcome feature. The whole game generally suffers from this problem, and even though it is nitpicky, it's crazy just how much time can be saved with faster features. After learning that we must rid the Deku tree of its curse, we're already thrown into the first dungeon, which could be considered the meat of the game, in no more than 20 minutes. Along with the Kokiri Forest, the inside of the Deku tree is amazing at familiarizing the player with all of the controls and the rules the dungeons will follow. Ocarina of Time did more than simply translate 2D Zelda's controls, it redefined how movement and interaction are handled in 3D games forever. The game takes A Link to the Past, so-called do button, and transforms it into a revolutionary mechanic essential for all 3D gaming. The context-sensitive A button is notable for how it makes interacting with the world simple and efficient, allowing Link to perform a variety of actions when needed with the simple click of a button. A context-sensitive interact button has become a staple in almost every 3D game after this one, and even while so many games have attempted it, it's interesting how Ocarina of Time struggles less in some games that would come out years later, such as Sonic Adventure 2. Ocarina of Time's context-sensitive controls set a new standard for 3D gaming, even with unconventional mechanics such as auto-jumping. Zelda games have always been known for the large arsenal of items a player has access to, and Ocarina of Time streamlines this key feature with the inclusion of 3 total item slots mapped to the C buttons. While it's amazing having easier access to items of your choosing, allowing for more on-the-fly puzzle solving, it's apparent that any instance where you do have to swap out items in the menu is much slower than that of Link to the Past or Link's Awakening. All of the menu subscreens have these slow transitions that really serve to bog down the pace during item-heavy sections that are all too infamous on the internet for a good reason. If it was just a bit faster, the water temple may have only taken me 2 hours on my first playthrough instead of 5. At least, I think, I don't know. The addition of more item slots is still a feature that's hard to complain about, although I do recommend playing with an original controller since mapping them to the right stick with modern emulators can cause occasional frustration when messing up an Ocarina song or accidentally wasting that precious milk you had. Aside from the context sensitivity, another key innovation of this game, and arguably the most important, is the Z targeting system. This came from two key inspirations, the first of which was the difficulty presented when trying to do tasks such as reading signs or jumping on Goombas in Mario 64 due to the axes not aligning on occasion. Since Zelda was slated for a much later release date, they were able to consider elements from Mario 64's use of 3D that could be improved upon in the 3D Zelda game. Fortunately, in Ocarina, you'll never have to worry about these issues when trying to aim at certain targets, making the new 3D environment feel seamless to navigate. The Z targeting is essential to the combat and progression of the game, but since there were no other games like it at the time with a Z axis, the development team had to look elsewhere for inspiration. The development team wanted to make the combat of the game mimic Japanese chanbara, meaning samurai cinema. This influenced the camera angles provided when targeting an enemy, as well as the typical one-on-one structure seen in these fights. The Z targeting excels at providing accurate and cinematic camera angles during these encounters. Not having direct camera control may be something you have to adjust to, which I did at first, but I can only recall a couple of instances where the lack of a second right stick genuinely dampened the quality. Plus, it means you can play this game with one hand, allowing you to do more important things, such as eating canes. Z targeting is a great evolution to 2D Zelda combat due to having access to more advanced dodges and attacks, which would serve as a direct inspiration for some of the most popular 3D action games of the last few generations. Enemies such as the Iron Knuckle and Stalfos utilize Z targeting well by forcing the player to take advantage of the evasive and defensive maneuvers exclusive to Z targeting. Thus, the combat encounters in Ocarina of Time can feel much more like proper duels and simple obstacles to deal with like the 2D games. Even when faced with multiple foes at once, enemy behavior seems to be comfortably designed to allow for more intimate encounters thanks to their AI being less aggressive, and with the addition of useful crowd control abilities such as the Spin Slash, which now has a magic radius. Z targeting also allows for a different approach to ranged combat, with the challenge being more about positioning and timing than simple aiming, which is a good choice considering all of the space present in a 3D game. Not all of the bosses are great, but many of them take advantage of Ocarina of Time's mechanics such as the targeting system and newly unlocked items. Discussion of the bosses is best left to highlighting each individual encounter's strengths and weaknesses, which will occur throughout these reviews. Ocarina of Time's general control and combat excel at getting their job done and are worthy of praise for their impact alone. The only nitpick I can really give is how Link's general movement can be a bit too slow at times. While the spacious world design is mostly to blame, there's a reason why constant rolling and side hopping and the sound of Link yelling has become a meme synonymous with this game. It's basically a Zelda staple at this point. You may have noticed that I started playing the game audio in the background for this section, and if it annoyed or irritated you, my point has been made clear. Just like many other players, however, I've grown numb to it. The general game feel of Ocarina of Time is remarkable for how well it holds up today. Even with the lack of direct camera control or a dedicated jump button, it pioneered so many essential 3D mechanics that it feels more like a blueprint than a relic, even over 25 years later. Now, the inside of the Deku Tree is an excellent tutorial dungeon that teaches all of these core gameplay principles and the rules the rest of the dungeons will follow. The Deku Tree introduces all the movement mechanics, dungeon structure, and item progression seen throughout the game perfectly. The enemies in the Deku Tree help ease the player into Z targeting by providing many stationary targets before they're expected to tackle moving Gomas. Going in, I remember initially expecting the dungeons to be much more combat heavy, but it quickly became clear the puzzles were the real focus. The enemies present are more so obstacles rather than full-fledged combat encounters that test pattern recognition and environmental interaction rather than reflexes. This threw me off at first, but over time, I began to see why this approach made dungeons so memorable. The structure of the Deku Tree takes advantage of one new facet unlocked with 3D design, verticality. Taking a leap of faith from the top of the tree down through the web and into the basement is a brilliant puzzle-solving moment and a showcase of the utility 3D brings to the table inside dungeons. While it is true that you could do this in Link to the Past by falling through floors, it would have a much weaker effect. Thanks to all of the tangible 3D space, you think to yourself, urethra, as they say. Using sticks as makeshift torches is a common motif during this dungeon as well. It's a subtle way to represent how all of your items can interact with the world. It's also a nice evolution from lighting them with a simple candle in past games. Ocarina of Time's dungeons are a series of rooms with puzzles and combat challenges that always introduce some kind of new item used throughout the rest of the dungeon. The slingshot is used to eliminate Skulltulas on the wall blocking your path and to give Link range capabilities. It's used well during the boss, but this item does highlight the extremely sensitive aiming controls in this game, which can be quite a nuisance. Other than that, it gets its job done well enough. I love stepping into the boss against Goma, as having to look up at her yourself is a creepy and memorable moment for the player. Her eye's weakness, the slingshot, teaches a rule that the rest of the dungeons will follow, which is that most of the bosses can be defeated with whatever new item you've unlocked. This makes them interesting but somewhat predictable and not much of a challenge. Finishing up the dungeon, the player is now equipped to tackle the rest of the game's challenges, as all of its mechanics are amazingly introduced in this dungeon. What's truly impressive is how it never wastes the player's time and provides memorable puzzle solving moments even on replays. It may not be one of the best dungeons, as it gets outclassed by later, more complex temples, but the Deku Tree stands the test of time as one of the best first levels in any game I've ever played. After ridding the Great Deku Tree of its curse, we learn our efforts were nothing but a test of courage, as it was destined to die all along from the curse Ganondorf placed on it. The Kokiri losing their guardian and their father figure is a tragic moment for the Kokiri and Link himself. The loss of parents is an inevitable and tragic part of growing up that many must go through, including Link, despite being a young boy. Ocarina of Time's story has a central theme about the tragedies of growing up and coming of age, and this initial tragedy is the moment the destined hero of Time's journey truly begins. The scene where Link says goodbye to Saria symbolizes leaving your childhood behind. The Kokiri were heavily inspired by Neverland and Peter Pan, as they're children who never grow up, are always watched over by the father figure, and are said to die if they leave the forest. Link is clearly different from the rest since he doesn't have a fairy, which subtly foreshadows a plot twist he was never truly one of them. If this scene was meant to be a heartfelt goodbye, which I initially thought my first playthrough, then it would be a failure, as we're simply told we're close to Saria rather than actually getting to spend any time to connect with her as a player. But it isn't. This moment symbolizes saying goodbye to your childhood, with Saria giving him the fairy ocarina being a memento that represents how people carry the memories and experiences from their youth into later stages of life. Generally, one problem I had on my first playthrough was taking everything at face value, since at that point, it's nothing more than an adventure where good battles evil. And the game's message goes much deeper than that. Both the loss of the Deku Tree and Link's departure from the Kokiri Forest mark the beginning of the game's deeper themes. What starts as a boy destined to defeat evil slowly reveals itself as a story about the inevitable tragedies of growing up. Oh boy, I can't wait to finally explore this place! I remember being taken quite aback by Hyrule Field at first, since it feels massive for a game of the time. Miyamoto even said stepping foot into Hyrule Field is his favorite moment in the entire game. Unfortunately, it's easy to see that it's too vast for its own good. The space between its many landmarks such as the Hyrule Castle Town and Lon Lon Ranch is absolutely nothing but empty space. Unfortunately, listening to Link's yipping and yapping is the fastest method of travel through this place. However, it is fortunate that at this point in the game, most of the areas young Link has business in are located in the northeast corner of the map, but it still introduces a bit of tedium when getting from point A to point B as a child. One of my favorite aspects of Hyrule Field is honestly the music. I love how it balances peaceful and adventurous melodies with more abrupt and harsh instrumentation as it goes on, which to me represents the various trials the player must endure throughout the adventure. It does its job very well. I do love the freedom felt after leaving the forest though, since it feels like this is when the adventure really begins. There are so many new sights to see and faces to meet, especially in Castle Town. This place is brimming with colorful NPCs, minigames to earn rewards, and side quests to partake in. I love all the jolly characters in the market, even including the grown man who hits on the child princess. Generally, most of the NPCs in this game succeed at not being generic info-dumping character models like a lot of games. While a lot of them are eerily eccentric, there are some like the guard blocking Death Mountain that initially mock you for being a child, but are then happy to tell you the best place to find a Hylian shield and also how to start the Happy Mask questline. Yeah, thanks man, way to remind me I'm playing a video game. One of these new faces for us to meet is Princess Zelda, but we first need to sneak into the castle to reach her. This is the first of the game's 2 stealth sections, and easily the superior one at that, all because of one key difference, the camera angles. It may seem like a given that you should obviously have fitting camera angles for the stealth, but just keep this in mind for later. One thing I love about this mission to meet Princess Zelda is the childlike lens it's portrayed through. Sneaking through guards to meet a little girl has horrible implications when you really think about it, but since Link is just a child, it's an innocent romp through the castle. And when you're caught, you're treated as a kid misbehaving like they normally do instead of facing any serious punishment for literally breaking and entering. It also helps that Hyrule has some of the worst guards of all time. Once we meet Princess Zelda, we learn about her suspicions about Ganondorf's allegiance to the royal family of Hyrule. But it's worth noting that it's all just ambition. Link and Zelda are these destined figures who have both had dreams prophesizing Ganondorf's betrayal, but since they're children, no one believes them. This relates to a common problem many children face growing up, which is when adults never believe them or assume they're too young to know what they're talking about. This happens a lot to Link especially, even after showing off Zelda's letter or playing Zelda's lullaby, which is only taught to trusted figures of Hyrule. His status is always doubted by other characters. While the scene in the courtyard is an impactful and iconic one, I do think it shows how the cutscenes and dialogue are definitely a bit too slow on replays. It also doesn't help that the story of the gods of Hyrule really doesn't add anything to the grand scheme of the game's themes. I didn't mind this on my very first playthrough, obviously, but this unskippable stretch of cutscenes can be a drag whenever I come back to this game. This is why when I choose to replay Ocarina of Time, I tend to take things slow and absorb everything I can about the world, since the game as a whole was pretty slow paced. It's here where Link learns his first ocarina song, introducing the mechanic to the game. The ocarina is a nice central mechanic since changing the time of day, calling opponent, and warping to areas of the map are very practical abilities to have. However, situations that call for you to play Zelda's Lullaby or the Song of Time often feel extremely dull, as you just see the Triforce or Song of Time block and know to play the song to progress. It never gets more complicated than that, so much so you question what the point even is. The main thing I like about the ocarina, however, is how many songs they're able to construct with only 5 notes, as it highlights the team's creativity. Plus, it's fun to mess around with. At this point, the game begins to open up more, so I'll discuss the main incentives for exploring the world: pieces of heart and gold Skulltula tokens. Heart pieces are one of my favorite parts of this game, since they're an amazing reward that perfectly embodies the exploration and empowerment Zelda is about to me. Collecting a piece of heart is a wonderful, and most importantly, tangible reward for the player throughout their adventure. Some rewards, like the Mask of Truth, can feel useless to players who want to beeline the story without learning more about the world, but all players can welcome extra health unless they're a challenge runner or something. This allows the game to reward them with a variety of tasks that test various skills while still making them feel meaningful. My favorite heart pieces to collect are honestly the ones that are just sitting out in the open because they test your knowledge over the controls by placing them in unconventional areas. The best examples are the ones found in Zora's River. It's easiest to grab them both with a boomerang after completing the dungeon, but the Kuko conveniently placed by the entrance can be taken advantage of to reach them before that. Or if you're lacking either of those skills, you can simply ride the magic bean in the future or use the hover boots. Coming up with ways to reach these sort of open-ended rewards as early as possible can often be some of the most satisfying parts of coming back to this game. I just love that feeling of getting stronger. Moreover, heart pieces are also a reward for curiosity in case players wonder what would happen if they lit all the torches in Zora's domain, or perhaps decided to sink down to the bottom of Zora's fountain with the iron boots. These tasks don't just serve the purpose of giving you more health, they draw you deeper into the world by making you feel as if everything has a worthwhile reward. The best part about collecting heart pieces is that there's 36 of them, so the player can choose to only collect the ones they enjoy while still being able to reap massive rewards. For instance, I think playing Ocarina with the Skull Kids is pretty tedious and boring, so I just skipped that one, and I'm still left with plenty of extra health. All in all, heart pieces are more than just a collectible. They're a brilliant reward that represents Ocarina of Time's focus on engaging with its rich world. It encourages the player to enjoy the journey itself, and even after multiple replays, the feeling of satisfaction and empowerment keeps me coming back. That said, I do have 2 small nitpicks on how health works in this game. Firstly, when you die and respawn, you come back with only 3 heart containers filled, which just makes it more punishing than it needs to be. And the beeping that plays when low on health is so grating, it incentivizes me to kill myself in-game to just end the suffering more than being careful and trying to look out for more hearts. Genuinely, this is my biggest pet peeve in all of gaming, and so many Zelda games do this and it drives me up a wall. Despite that, I still love the thrill of seeking out these heart pieces for everything they represent in the game's world. In all honesty, when I first played Ocarina of Time, I rarely gave heart pieces a second thought, since I was too focused on progressing the story and beating my very first Zelda game. The satisfaction of racking up heart pieces is one of the aspects I missed out on most of my first playthrough, since the empowerment I feel throughout my adventure is one of the most satisfying parts of the entire game for me. Unless I'm doing a challenge run, I can't see myself playing without collecting so many ever again. The other main collectible, the gold Skulltula tokens, isn't nearly as enjoyable for me. The idea of collecting these tokens to rid this tragic family of their curse is a compelling one, but it's the execution that falls quite flat for me. The gold Skulltulas are always situated between a rock and a hard place, with the only clue being the sound they make, which is perfectly fine and fair, but there's a lot less to say about them than the various heart piece locations. My main problem with them is the fact that there's so damn many. There are 100 total, and rewards are given out in small increments, typically of 10, but I find some of them pretty negligible. The only worthwhile rewards are the wallet upgrades, since not only does it increase your carrying capacity, but there are a handful of useful items you can only buy with triple-digit prices. Had I engaged with this quest more in my first playthrough, playthrough, I probably would have been less frustrated buying my equipment back from accidentally losing them to a like if I wasn't short on Skulltula tokens. However, I still don't think these upgrades justify collecting all of them. You only need to collect half of the tokens to get every heart piece, but there's one final reward for collecting all 100, which is something I've never been motivated to do, as racking up 50 was tedious enough. It really feels like they stretched their limits to reach that number, as some seem quite random. Rolling into random trees or playing the Song of Storms around rocks doesn't feel like meaningful exploration. It's fortunate that nothing in the game forces you to engage with this, because infinite rupees as a reward is hardly worth the tedium and effort. Fortunately, the player can reap some other sweet rewards from their exploration as well in the form of bottles and great fairy spells. Empty bottles are actually an amazing multi-purpose item not only for puzzle solving but strategy as well, since having some milk or a bottled fairy on standby is always handy. Being able to carry bugs, fish, and blue fire only makes them more valuable. You're only granted one through the main story, so it's your job to seek them out by completing tasks, both of which involve cuckoos, funnily enough, that are as charming as they are short and sweet to complete. These are worthwhile rewards that I always find myself seeking out on replays, and I think the charming ways that you acquire them help sell this section of the game's innocent atmosphere. Throughout Hyrule are many great fairy fountains that always grant Link some sort of spell or upgrade. Many of them provide useful offensive and defensive upgrades, with Din's Fire and Faroe's Wind being must-haves in my opinion. That said, I'm not a fan of the final fairy upgrade to Link's health bar, as being able to essentially double your health right outside Ganon's castle feels like a lazy helping hand to players who don't deserve it, since it's a massive upgrade. The rest of their locations feel more appropriate at upgrading the player at a steady pace though, making them meaningful rewards in the long run. The world of Ocarina of Time may just be the aspect that's grown on me the most coming back to this game. Even if I still view the main Hyrule Field as quite empty, the rest of the land is brimming with interesting activities to pursue and exciting rewards that are more than just scavenging for items and power-ups, but rather embracing the spirit of discovery, testing the world's limits, and seeing how far your curiosity can take you. And even if you know every inch of land, figuring out new and exciting ways to explore keeps me coming back. What I also love is how these rewards represent more than just gameplay advantages. They feel like reminders of the innocence the childlike portion embodies. The way the game blends lighthearted discoveries with novel and exciting rewards adds to its themes and atmosphere in ways that other games wish they could, which is saying a lot for a game of over 25 years. Exploring Hyrule as Child Link feels like a wondrous romp through a comfortable land, and that's why replaying this game and seeking out rewards will always feel special to me. After that leisurely break exploring Hyrule, let's return to the next story dungeon up on Death Mountain. Zelda's letter takes us to Goron City, featuring a race that's impossible not to love from concept alone. They are simultaneously a proud warrior race with skilled craftsmanship and heavy ties to the royal family of Hyrule, yet they are also chubby, mountain-dwelling rock enthusiasts who refuse to eat any rocks that aren't of the utmost quality. Their leader, Darunia, throws a hilarious childlike temper tantrum over this fact and refuses to talk to anyone until he hears Saria's song, causing him to dance as giddily as can be, which is an incredibly charming scene. The Gorons are some of my favorite characters in this game, and their aloof but also brotherly nature makes it impossible not to love them. One detail I love is how, unlike with the Deku tree where Link had to prove his courage through a trial, the Gorons value connection and camaraderie above all else. Link earns their respect not through battle but by lifting Darunia's spirits. This so-called rock crisis in Dodongo's Cavern that disrupts their harvest is yet another reflection of this game's childhood perspective. While it is true that King Dodongo invaded their cavern and decreased their supply, it's only painted as such a massive problem with the likes of Darunia because the Gorons are a lazy race that are used to having everything taken care of for them by their environment. They're almost like children, they're used to everything being handed to them, and when things are disrupted, they throw tantrums about their problems without understanding why it happens, but also refusing help from others. Their carefree, almost childish way of life makes them a perfect fit for this stage of Link's journey, conveying the stubborn naivety of childhood, though this makes what happened to them 7 years later all the more tragic. Throughout this stretch of gameplay, the game fortunately provides many hints to try going back to the Lost Woods to talk to Saria, so it's really on the player if they were to get lost before the dungeon. Darunia rewards us with the Goron Bracelet, which is an interesting item for the player to unlock to introduce the core concept of the bomb bag before unlocking it in the dungeon proper. Dodongo's Cavern is yet another excellent dungeon for this segment of the game. In fact, I would argue it's the best Child Link dungeon. Ocarina of Time's first 3 dungeons as Child Link are preliminary dungeons of sorts. They introduce the core dungeon principles and get you involved with the game's item-based progression and puzzles to keep the player engaged and consistently challenged, while simultaneously giving just enough guidance before being thrown into the deep end with the adult timeline's mini temples. Judging from this basis, I believe Dodongo's Cavern is the most excellent out of these 3 introductory dungeons, upping the ante from the Deku tree in all of the best ways. While it remains somewhat linear, guiding the player through a series of challenges, it also opens opens up the opportunity for exploration, such as finding maps and compasses, while introducing a central room layout that would become a staple in many later dungeons. The Cavern's layout offers puzzles with the bomb flowers that are placed in static locations, with the main challenge being when and where to use them, testing the player's environmental awareness and ingenuity, with notable examples such as having to time the bomb throw to reach a distant wall, or using an extra bomb flower to set off a chain reaction to lower the staircase. One of the dungeon's most memorable moments. Once the bomb bag is unlocked properly, the player is no longer given help on where to use them, and it's entirely up to them to figure out how they should be used. Dropping bombs into the statue's eyes may not be as exciting of a urethra moment as plunging through the web in the Deku tree, but it's an excellent showcase of how the dungeon slowly ramps up the difficulty with its central item. Bombs in themselves aren't a terribly interesting item, which is why I love how this dungeon introduces a simpler version of the item so it can slowly ramp up in a natural way that stays consistently challenging and complements the item itself. While the Deku tree's combat encounters contain many stationary targets that grow accustomed to Z targeting, the Dodongo's Cavern takes it to the next level with encounters that test your positioning and confidence with the Z targeting. The Dodongos have a weakness on their tail and a punishing fire attack to encourage players to take advantage of strafing around enemies. And the Lizalfos are agile creatures that force players to become confident in the flow of blocking, strafing, and attacking to make it through encounters, with the second mini-boss against them introducing a more challenging arena. These are excellent encounters to lay the groundwork for the game's tougher and more refined combat gameplay later on, and just fun encounters in general, even on replays. The boss, King Dodongo, definitely leaves an impact based on its fierce design and climactic atmosphere. Now it is true its weakness of inhaling bombs stays true to the dungeon's theme of finding environmental clues to use your items. Its one massive rolling attack can just be trivialized by ducking with the Hylian shield. Using this game's logic, the rolling Goron on Death Mountain is actually stronger than King Dodongo since you can't block this. It really makes you wonder why the Gorons don't just deal with King Dodongo themselves. They're clearly stronger than Link. They're just traumatizing him for no reason. In the end, I still enjoy the encounter for the experience it provides rather than disliking it for the difficulty it lacks. This is only the second dungeon after all, and Ocarina of Time is not the game I would choose to play when looking for difficult challenges across the whole playthrough. All in all, Dodongo's Cavern proves itself to be the best of the childlike dungeons by raising the stakes in both puzzle solving and combat, subtly teaching the player to take advantage of the environment in clever ways and become more confident with its mechanics. Despite being simpler than all the later dungeons and temples, I honestly see myself looking forward to this one just as much, if not more than a few, which is a testament to how strong this dungeon's design is. Even though we can now use our bombs to open up Zora's Domain, which holds the last spiritual stone, let's take another break from dungeon crawling and play some minigames. Generally, most of the current minigames available attempt to translate the skills learned in gameplay into challenges to earn rewards with varying degrees of success. The Town Shooting Gallery, the most traditional of the bunch, provides a simple challenge that should be really fun with two caveats that dampen the quality. One, the sequence of targets is fixed on each attempt, leaving inherently less replay value than a perhaps randomized gallery. This means the challenge is mainly gearing yourself up to hit each target, but this turns more into a fight against the controls because aiming in first person is extremely sensitive, the second flaw. It feels like any movement of the analog stick is going from 0 to 100, and it's probably the aspect of this game's controls that has aged the worst. The Bomb Chew Bowling Alley would be a great translation of gameplay if it wasn't used only 3 times in the entire game, with this being the most clever utilization of bomb chews anyways. It's decently enjoyable to play, but mostly challenging due to random factors like the unpredictable trajectory or the randomized layouts. Many of these minigames feature randomized rewards, sometimes even having the chance of a heart piece, but this is the minigame where random prizes frustrates me the most, since the game itself is inherently luck-based, meaning you can get unlucky with the toughest layouts and not even get rewarded a heart piece, which is easily the most valuable prize. The treasure chest game has little to no reason to exist aside from making players feel clever for cheating it with the lens of truth. I've never been to a casino, so maybe I'm not the right audience for this, but I find the concept boring and the chances of winning without the lens of truth are so low that I don't even ever touch the minigame until I have the lens of truth to earn a free heart piece. These are the main town minigames, but a few others exist throughout the world. The Skull Kid Jam Session is a fine memory test with no inherent flaws, but I do find it too tedious to come back for the heart piece, so it's one I'm fine skipping. Dompe's Digging minigame, massive air quotes, is so incredibly sluggish and luck-based, not to mention annoying to access it at the right time. I have absolutely no incentive to ever come back to it. The Zora diving minigame is interesting because it provides a fine challenge, but you typically earn well above 20 rupees for playing it, so there's almost no challenge or con to playing it. In fact, there's actually less than a 5% chance to obtain an orange rupee that is guaranteed to fill up your wallet even when upgraded to 500. This game definitely should have been balanced more, but at the same time, I can't complain when it gives easy rupees. The minigames for Link to play as a child do vary in quality, but the game would definitely be missing a bit of soul if they had been removed for both gameplay and thematic purposes. They provide rewards that are decent enough to incentivize players to take a shot at them, and pausing your adventure to play some happy-go-lucky minigames perfectly captures the childhood theme, as it's incredibly believable that a young boy will want to play games even when given pressing matters to attend to. We now have our first side quest opened up to us as well inside the Happy Masks shop, which introduces a quirky side quest where you borrow masks and sell them to make people happy. The name of the game here is really just being familiar with the world to find who all the best customers are, since if you pay attention to your surrounding, it's not hard to figure out. The kid in the graveyard would obviously love the spooky mask, and the skull mask is a perfect fit for the skull kid without one in the Lost Woods. It also helps that many NPCs will have unique dialogue depending on what you're wearing, which makes it fun to experiment until you realize different NPCs can have the same dialogue even when different masks. Selling the final bunny head is tricky due to the marathon man being a moving target, but chasing him down and making the sale is surprisingly charming. Sure, the overall object of this questline isn't terribly interesting, being somewhat slow and repetitive, but it's all about the charm of the world itself rather than the destination. Completing the quest rewards you with the Mask of Truth. Interestingly, this mask offers no kind of gameplay benefit, but instead lets you talk to gossip stones to learn rumors and small bits of lore about the world. Honestly, a perfect reward for players already familiarizing themselves with Hyrule. I love a lot of the details you can learn from this thing, honestly. Overall, the Happy Mask questline isn't one I find myself completing on every single playthrough, as its reward merely exists to help players learn more about the world, which I already know, but that doesn't stop it from being quite endearing. Running through the Kingdom of Hyrule and selling masks to lots of wacky faces to make them happy is honestly the best questline you can ask for the childlike portion. It perfectly embodies childlike wonder and innocence. With the bomb bag, we can now access Zora's domain, leading us to the final childhood dungeon inside Lord Jabu-Jabu's belly. The domain has a serene atmosphere. Stepping into it for the first time gives players a wave of tranquility and elegance, at least in my opinion. The Zora race isn't terribly interesting, especially compared to the Gorons, but their resourceful nature and ties to the royal family of Hyrule help build the peaceful atmosphere inside the domain. Instead, the game mainly uses the young Princess Ruto to capture its themes. Our goal in the dungeon is to save Princess Ruto, who is stuck inside Lord Jabu-Jabu's belly, after attempting to feed him as per usual. Throughout this portion of the game, Ruto's relationship with Link realistically portrays childhood feelings of love and crushes, which is an important part of growing up for many. At first, she is bratty and reluctant to accept Link's help. This is because the selfish and naive nature of children makes it hard to truly open up. After Link saves her and defeats Baronade, Ruto becomes infatuated with Link and makes a promise to marry him one day, which our silent protagonist sort of reluctantly agrees with. These kinds of big promises, especially with love, are prominent during the stage of childhood since kids dream big even with all the uncertainty of the future. This innocent moment between these two children gives us a glimpse into the innocent world Link is currently in. It makes what happens in the future even more tragic, but we're not quite there yet. To enter the dungeon, the sequence of events can get slightly confusing for newcomers, mostly since it may feel random having to play a minigame to unlock an item to reach an area with an item you can use to catch fish for Jabu-Jabu. I feel as if having to catch the fish in Lake Hylia would be more logical than in Zora's domain, but that's just me. Despite the fact that we aren't even halfway through the adventure, we're already presented with what is easily the most standout and unique setting in the game. While other dungeons typically provide eerie temples themed around natural elements such as fire or water, this place is icky and gross with lots of weird churn sounds and strange fluids, plus these tentacles blocking your routes. It's impossible to know what to expect inside a giant fish's stomach, and it makes every step of this dungeon feel unsettling and uncomfortable, not by being scared but really just grossed out. While Dodongo's Cavern only has one main gimmick via the bombs, the dungeon in Jabu-Jabu's belly technically has both a traversal item and a dungeon item in the form of Princess Ruto and the boomerang respectively. Ruto serves as a navigational challenge of sorts, as you may have to carry her across many chasms and unconventional layouts to bring her back to the main floor. Then she's mostly carried around to occasionally press weighted switches and to bring her back to the spiritual stone she's looking for, of course. The rooms Ruto opens up will eventually contain the dungeon item of the boomerang, an item that works perfectly in tandem with the Z targeting. However, it's not used very compellingly at first, since this portion of the dungeon feels rather boring. While it's true completing these prerequisites and rooms to access the next is essentially introducing the player to the concept of small keys without actually featuring them, tackling one room to the next all at once is as basic as it can get, honestly. Dungeons like the Deku Tree and the Dodongo's Cavern have a linear progression, but it's much more cleverly and naturally designed than a basic series of rooms if you ask me. The challenges seen in each room are nothing crazy. The tasks can range from defeating all the enemies or fighting a relatively simple tentacle. While they do provide a new kind of combat via ranged combat, it isn't exactly up to ante. I believe its best uses are hitting switches at unconventional angles due to its travel curvature and its ability to stun, which works remarkably well in the dungeon boss. While I love the mini bosses and other enemy encounters in Dodongo's Cavern, I find them to be nothing special in this dungeon. The standard enemy lineup is mostly jellyfish and other airborne enemies you can take down with the boomerang. They aren't super interesting, but are kind of annoying to bump into before acquiring the item. I'm also not particularly fond of the mini boss against the Big Octo, as it's not fun to chase around the arena, and it doesn't get any deeper than that, unfortunately. Apparently, it was so good in Link's Awakening they just had to bring it back. But Baronade is probably the best use of a dungeon item we've seen yet. Locking onto each tether and having to time your throw while simultaneously strafing around its attacks is an interesting use of the item that forces the player to engage with its mechanics much more than simply locking on and attacking. This is actually a somewhat challenging encounter, forcing the player to get to grips with the best ways to use their newly acquired item, and it's easily the best dungeon boss Child Link must fight. While the inside of Jabu-Jabu's belly may have the best boss and theming of the child dungeons, it may actually be my least favorite, unfortunately. It has a great dungeon item, but it's showcased in lots of straightforward sections no deeper than tackling one objective to the next, lacking any compelling puzzle-solving moments or room progression on more than a basic surface level. To be frank, this dungeon bores me the most out of any of Ocarina of Time's dungeons, but even at its worst, the game is still pretty solid. I definitely wouldn't call this dungeon bad. After obtaining all 3 spiritual stones, we can now head back to the Temple of Time. However, the nightmare foreshadowed in the very beginning of the game unfolds exactly how we remember, with one key difference. While Link cowered in fear in his dream upon seeing the evil face of Ganondorf, he now readies his sword and shield to face his fears. This is a very direct example of the character development that has occurred on the journey thus far, and it may seem like a minor showcase, but it's gratifying to see our character growing throughout the adventure. Link may not have much of a personality at all, but he's still a character in the story, meaning his character can grow. Unfortunately, this event reveals our developed courage is still not nearly enough to face Ganondorf, as he easily triumphs over us to continue chasing after Zelda and Impa. In a moment of desperation and hope, Zelda tosses us the mystical Ocarina of Time. Oh my god, it's the name of the game! The instrument of the royal family used to open the door of time, containing the Master Sword and the entrance to the sacred realm. The tone of the world changes drastically after this moment. What was once a lighthearted world for a child to explore has now become one that desperately seeks a hero to stop the impending doom approaching. If you visit the alleys of Hyrule Castletown, you can hear the last words of a dying soldier fatally wounded by Ganondorf, echoing the wishes of Zelda before her sudden escape. This interaction showcases the great attention to detail put into the world of Ocarina of Time, as well as how the subject matter can be serious when it needs to be, despite being a game targeted for all ages. Even if it's nothing graphic, it's still quite unsettling to witness someone pass away right before you in what could be considered a kid's game. Fortunately for us, the hero that Hyrule needs just so happens to be Link. The ambient peace inside the Temple of Time feels extremely grand, symbolizing what's to come for not only our hero, but the Kingdom of Hyrule. It's now time to unsheathe the Master Sword and enter the Sacred Realm. But not everything goes according to plan. However, that's for the next part of this review. I thank everyone who's made it to the end of the video, and I hope you all look forward to the next part of the review series covering the adult Link portion of the game, which should hopefully be out soon, but I don't have any release date yet. See you all next time.